Well, hello everyone. This is January 6, 2010, and this is Day 9 Daily, number 43. We're going to be doing a little Hiya versus MVP action. Well, hello everyone. We haven't really been doing too many Terran versus Terrans, and it's a pretty sweet matchup. One of my favorites to watch, actually, so I figured why not do more of it, right? I just have to make a few announcements. First of all, it is so cold in my room. Oh my god, I'm like wearing a sweater. I live in like Southern California where you almost go in like bikinis all day because it's like so hot, but god, I'm freezing. So hopefully I heat up, have my little green tea here. I'm going to continue to suck down that. Also, Team Liquid Star League, or should I say the PokerStrategy.com Team Liquid Star League, is starting up this weekend. So there's going to be Noni vs. Idra on Saturday, casted by Artosis and Chill. And then on the 10th of January, that would be Sunday, I'll be doing some analysis of some round 2 replays at 11 a.m., so tune into that one. Also, in very exciting news, I purchased Volume 6 of Ultimate Spider-Man for 1 cent, and I'm a little worried about that. It was on Amazon. It was like, book like new, just 1 cent, and all I have to do is pay for shipping and handling. So I figured I could, take $4 to just do a little experiment. So I'm hoping that shows up because it's Venom, and oh my god, Venom, he is the sickest character ever. I love Venom, especially because I used to play the original Marvel vs. Capcom, and that game is so fun, and Venom was the man then. That's actually where my love for him began. But yeah, that's about it. That's all the interesting things that I have to say. I also ate sushi for dinner. Sushi. So anyways, let's go ahead and cut right on over to the main screen so we can start doing a little bit of analysis. So here we have Fighting Spirit. Good map. Enjoy it quite a bit. Not as many options as I'd like on a map, but, still, I think it has interesting mid and late game potentials for it. So since we're doing Terran vs. Terrans, the most important thing I want to highlight are these expansions, these side expos, because inevitably, by the way, let me just note that one Terran player spawns here, and the other spawns here in this game. That means that, we're either going to get a map split like this, where one player has this half of the map and the other player has this half of the map. Or we're going to have this sort of, horizontal map split. But what's important to note is let's pretend I'm this Terran here, and I'm going up to take this expo up here. This is like my goal, is to hijack this main. Note that if we have this sort of even map split here, that suddenly this expansion becomes really important. Notice how my mouse almost cuts right through it. And I'm not doing that, just just to be goofy, I'm not just being like, whoops, cut right through it, It really is, these expansions are crucial to playing this matchup out. Because a lot of times, for instance, imagine that I am snaking along this way, right? I take my natural, my second natural, and I take this main and this main. This expansion right here becomes increasingly difficult to take because my opponent can put lines up here and sort of poach in just a little bit. Obviously, there's going to be these huge tank lines that are establishing themselves in the middle, and if one player can just poach a little bit farther forward up into some region like this, he immediately cuts off his opponent from safely taking this side expansion. And, because in this matchup, making sure that you can stay even in resources is so crucial. Having those side expansions, having control of them becomes absolutely essential. And also you'll note that just, given their structure, they're very small and hence very droppable. So yeah, I think that's all the stuff that I really want to worry about, these side expansions. Also, let's just talk a little bit about these naturals because they end up being fairly important. Because they're so narrow right here, a lot of players like early expands, just going like one factory expanding and then building another factory or something like that. But what I think is most important is after both players do whatever early expanding action they do, early vultures with speed to mine up the other side of your opponent's fat bridge is so good. It's easy, it's fun. You have these super mobile units in a fairly immobile matchup, so you get to mine up this region. And generally, players are smart enough to know that they can't lose control that early. But still, you plant mines along this way. And notice that if I'm Terran here and I'm mining up like this in this little concave, and I got my little opponent up here in his little triangle, that this gives me a lot of leeway in what I want to do. So for instance, if my opponent chooses to push this way, I can easily establish a line and take this half of the map. If my opponent chooses to push the other way, I can easily take this side, easily take this side. Really, the fact is your opponent can't comfortably push both angles if there's a lot of mines there. Early on, that is. Naturally, later he's going to have several 100,000 turrets just sort of lurking about, but, until that point in time, I think you're in good shape. Also, another little side note, the center expansion is important because if you can poach far enough forward with your tank line, you suddenly have 2 additional geysers. A lot of players you'll see do this. Especially, if you have a player who has these expansions, has taken this one, but can't quite grab hold of this main or this natural, you'll see them tend to pierce forward like this. They'll have this sort of rounded tank line, but then they'll just jut up like this and take this as another expansion. The last thing I want to discuss is this inverted triangle right here. The fact that if you take this expo and this expo, it's pretty hard to drop in the main. It becomes pretty significantly difficult to do that. So, yeah, listen to that song. Oh, better like you. Oh man, I was playing a remix of this song right before the match started. That's like a little cover of it, but oh man, the remix I was playing was from Trent Moeller's Essential Mix. Obviously, I love Trent Moeller, therefore I love his Essential Mix from his 2006 BBC Radio 1 show thing. I strongly recommend all of you download it. Seriously, you can just Google Trent Moeller Essential Mix, and you will find it right there on Rapid Share. And you can just download it while you're listening to the soothing, reassuring, analytic voice of your friendly neighborhood Day 9. So, I actually didn't look for which player was who, so let's... should probably check that out. So there we go. That's MVP spawning in the top left with the Terran pieces. We have Hiya in the bottom right, also with the Terran pieces. I like Hiya's Terran vs. Terran quite a bit. He does tend to use vultures in a very sexy way that always makes me excited to watch. Now, one thing I do want to say is that I have not watched this game. About half the games, I would say, are ones that I've chosen because I watched them the night before and was like, oh my god, that's so sweet, I gotta talk about this. And then I do, But other half of the time, with games like these, I'm really just getting the opportunity to catch up and talk about stuff blind. Because it's good to have a nice mix of stuff to talk about. Watching things right after they happen is useful because I know what's going to happen, so I can point out things in advance. Watching these things blind is useful because it shows how to think about things as they're going on, and that's why every so often I tend to, actually I should do this more and more, do some of my own replays, because then I can even say, and this is how I would have responded. You don't see it in this game, but this is how I planned to account for this. And we have both players scouting about. An interesting thing to note is that Hiya is scouting across this middle of the map to build a barracks here. This is actually pretty stable to do this. I actually enjoy doing this in this matchup quite a bit. Alright, I'll just turn this down a little bit so they don't scream quite so loud. There we go. But yeah, if you can run out here and build in the middle of the map, so notice the way that Hiya did that, he bounced up here just to make sure that there was nothing else building up here, and then he just came right back and built. That allows you to lift and then scout the shortest possible path. For any of you Zerg users out there, that's why it's useful to send your Overlord up in this direction to spot for a proxy, and then you have the closest possible distance to one of the 3 natural expansions. All those little things are very useful. But this is, I think, very much so not cheesy to do. Because the scouting advantage you can get from that barracks is so useful. Also, build a marine out of this and send it right back to your ramp. And then lift. I think it's pretty important to have a marine hanging out there at your ramp. We see Hiya doing the smart thing, getting ready to build a factory, which has 1,250 hit points. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I was in this class with this girl who was, she was doing a presentation, and her portion of the presentation was to talk about a collectible card game she made up related to Alice in Wonderland, and because she was just giving an outline, she didn't have to go into details, and all she really talked about was the hit points of all the various cards. She's like, and here is the Mad Hatter, and it has 35 hit points. This is based off the game Magic Gather. And of course I almost spat my drink out right there in class, man. Ah, awesome. So we are in fact seeing a barracks floating along here with some Marines which have 40 hit points. Oh man, awesome. Both players continuing to build their little factories away. And scouting out what's up. Doing the good old double scout, checking out what's up with the SCV, and then having this barracks come in from behind. And see, this I like a lot, building one vulture before you get the add-on, because this allows you to put just a little bit of pressure on your opponent, and in particular, we're seeing this barracks get harassed here. we want to be able to kill off those pesky Marines and then just kind of force our opponent back. What I think I should note is the fact that MVP got 4 Marines. That is a pretty significant number of Marines early on in Terran vs. Terran. Especially given how crucial it is to get a whole lot of factory units out. I mean, Medic Marine do almost nothing in this matchup. So it's really important to see what plan MVP has in store. For instance, he could be expanding very early and building an early bunker. These are all reasonable options to consider. As long as you're really considering them, I think that's what's important. Don't ever just be like, oh, well, want to kill his barracks, I guess I'll make Marines, because that will interfere with your early plans quite a bit. So we do see some even more early Vulture action coming out. Oh, this is what I love from Hiya. Again, I haven't seen this game. I just don't want anyone to think that I was like, oh, I love Hiya's Vulture action. Oh, what do we have here? Looks like he's making Vultures. No, I'm not so petty as to try to look cool on the internet. Oh, man. And we see the expansion going down for Hiya. So let's think a little bit about what Hiya's doing right now. He's early expanding and then sticking to making Vultures for quite some time. This allows him to delay his opponent's expansion, if he's doing that, if he's doing some sort of one factory push. But also, we can still back up and get the speed and mines for the Vultures if we deem that necessary. Or, even if that's a planned component of our build. Yeah, because look right here. These guys will be pretty easy to take out with these 3 Vultures. Generally, you can't do something like get 5 Vultures with speed really fast and try to run up the Terran's ramp, because the Terran will be able to block it incredibly easily. It's when, you start getting 10, 11 Vultures, and you can really affect your opponent who's already taken his natural expansion or something like that. Oh, then you can run the Vultures and really put the hurt on. This is a little bit dangerous. I kind of dislike the fact that this barracks might end up falling. And while you guys think about that, I'm going to have some delicious green tea. Oh, that was fantastic. So this is an opening I also like by MVP. Honestly, of all openings I do in this matchup, I prefer the 1 factory, 1 starport the most, just because it's so easy. It's really nice. I mean, you get to know what's up with the Wraith, you get to push relatively early on with your tanks. Yeah, and see, look, this is what's nice about what Hiya opened with, is that he didn't really need any gas early on, so he got to delay getting those tanks out. But of course, now that once he does begin getting them out, he can get them very quickly because he already has 2 factories worth of junk. And then he's getting the armory to make sure he can deal with any sort of early Wraith aggression, or Wrath as we like to call it. But what I love so much about this opening that MVP is doing, again, it's very easy, and it allows you to expand pretty quickly, is another thing I didn't get the chance to mention yet. And see, look, 1 starport with Wraiths and Cloak. It's really nice because you're stockpiling the tanks out of the 1 factory anyways to stay alive early on from Vultures and any sort of early tank push, but then you get the opportunity to also push pretty quickly. That's one thing to think about in actually all matchups, is that if you're building something up for defense, what will allow you to use that for offense right around the corner? Yeah, very, very crucial concept, because you never want to just be playing defensively, If you're expanding a whole bunch and you get Mutalisks to defend those expansions, then, if you're expanding a whole bunch and you need to defend the expansions, you could go Lurker Sunken, or you could go Mutalisk and bounce back between all those expansions and put pressure on your opponent and kill off Templar and all that happy stuff. So as you look at Hiya, he's getting real aggressive early on because controlling this double bridge is so big. A lot of players might be like, oh, well, what if I just expand up here? Then I'll have this opportunity to move down here. But, yeah, it's a pretty small ramp. Look at the size of that thing. I mean, really, just a handful of mines, and even like 2 or 3 tanks positioned right in range of this ramp. Not closer, but just right in range of the ramp, so it hits them right when they come down, is, like, so obnoxious to deal with. And the good old Manor Barracks. Manor Barracks is a very standard sort of technique. Is he getting a really good position with those tanks? And what I'm certain Hiya's going to do here is this is what I call just poking in. You go up here and you examine what's up here, but if there were some siege tanks and you're worried about mines, you just bounce right back and you continue with the contain. However, Hiya is in an excellent position to actually just kill this expansion. This is one thing to worry about a little bit. This is the potential danger of, waiting that long to get siege. Because, whenever I go one factory, one starport, I go one factory, one starport, and then I worry about expanding. But we saw one factory, wait a little bit, then get a command center, then get the add-on to the factory, then get the starport. So that's why this siege is delayed by quite a lot. So already Hiya has a pretty significant advantage. Actually, he's at a really enormous advantage. I haven't seen this game, and I'm hoping it doesn't end like right now. Oh man, there's siege. And note though that siege tanks are totally fucking imbalanced, so naturally 2 siege tanks will be able to hold off infinity stuff. Oh, oh man, that's the best. So this is one thing that we also like about these sort of 1-star port openings, is we can be really obnoxious with these wraiths in our opponent's mineral line. Now, let's discuss this timing right now that we've just seen. So, I mean, I'm kind of laughing about the fact that Hiya just went in there and really put the hurt on MVP and, like, killed the expansion and then put the killer vulture on there and blew up MVP's mine. But think about what these wraiths are doing. Imagine for a moment that Hiya has not done this early push. We have these wraiths in Hiya's main doing damage. What does Hiya have to do? Oh, well, you know, he has to build some Goliaths. And, you know, a lot of players from Hiya's point of view think, what are these wraiths going to do? I mean, I have detection. I'm just going to build some Goliaths. No problem. But those 2 Goliaths are going to delay any early aggression by a good 30 seconds, which gives you enough time to get siege. So if we go back and look at this game right here, so let's actually rewind this, and note that this push is happening right about at the 7-minute mark. It's really getting in our opponent's face. And then we're going to see the siege tanks right up. Yeah, see, look. 20 seconds later, we already have siege tanks as MVP. If this Wraith harass in the main was able to delay the opponent by another 20 seconds by forcing him to make Goliaths, MVP would have been completely and totally safe. So let's just say that one more time. By getting these wraiths and forcing our opponents to get Goliaths, it delays our opponent's push by just a little bit that makes our expansion much, much, much safer. Unfortunately, Hiya had an absolutely beautifully timed push, partly thanks to the fact that he delayed getting those add-ons and got those 3-4 vultures that ended up helping him out so much and pushed in there without tanks and siege. All that was instrumental for the success of that attack, but now we're starting to see that Hiya has to play a little bit defensively, and this is what is nice about this opening once again. I mean, clearly MVP's in a bad position. I don't really want to argue that, you know, MVP, oh yeah, he's fine, don't worry about it, MVP, you got this, man. But, you know, it allows you to delay the push by forcing some Goliaths to get pooped out. By the way, factories don't make units, they poop out units, just to be clear. If there's one thing that we take away from this little analysis. And of course, MVP has to play fairly defensively at this point in time. And if you do go one, whoopsie daisies, if you do go one factory, 1-star port, be careful with getting dropships too early. It's a pretty big temptation to, you know, just build a dropship because you have the add-on and you can, and try to do something fancy with that. I don't mind doing things with, you know, getting some vultures with mines and loading them up into a dropship early and doing some harass, but just sort of offhandedly getting dropships right now seems a little bit weak to me, because we don't quite have enough factory units, we don't quite have the economic infrastructure, let alone the defensive capabilities to just not die. And I used to have a pen that I wanted to twiddle, and it is somewhere around here, but alas, it cannot be found. So I will just play with this tea bag. Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about this technique, because this is really important. Anytime you're pushing up into your opponent's base, don't get overexcited, especially in this matchup. If you can even set up right there, this is huge. Look, your Terran opponent cannot cross this line. That's pretty bad. But see, this little thing, I'm going to run out with an SCV and run up with the tanks. Notice it's one SCV. It's not like a bazillion SCVs. Juste un. So then, you know, this forces our opponent to back off a bit. So even though it looks like not that big of a gain, our opponent's still containing us, we have a much easier time taking the expansion at the top. So I would honestly prefer this pulled back just a little bit. I mean, right now, when it's this low tank count, I think it's fine. But later on in the game, you want to make it so that your tanks, this bridge is when your tanks are just in range. That makes it impossible for your opponent. Well, not impossible, but it makes it really, really hard. So naturally, we're seeing this sight range advantage thanks to these barracks. That's how these 3 tanks, or these originally 4 tanks, were able to take out 2 of originally 4 tanks up there. But notice that the sight range advantage, which is huge in this matchup, that's one thing that's very nice about getting Wraiths early. You almost always get the sight range advantage. You don't have to wait for your ultra slow-ass barracks to just sort of blob its way over there. I mean, a barracks loses in a race with an Overlord, man. The Overlord's, laughing, and the barracks is trying to catch up. And also, another thing that's awesome about Wraiths is notice how it was 2 shots, 2 shots, 2 shots. Each of these bad boys can now fall in 2 tank hits. That is quite helpful. Again, Wraiths do 8 damage, so it will do over 10 damage. That means, therefore, that when your tanks do 70 damage each, that they will be able to finish off these remaining weakened tanks. So unfortunately, none of these tanks are actually siege, so Hiya's still being able to push in. And look, a few SCVs just to throw off the tanks. Nice and sturdy pushing action by Hiya. And also, Hiya's not being mondo aggressive. He was really setting up a contain. He got a little bit of an advantage, and then he's pushing in pretty effectively. But in the meantime, he's taking this bottom expansion, adding on up to 4 factories. No all-ins here, right? Just continuing smooth transition action. And MVP trying to do some hero hold mode. And again, if Hiya just sieges, right there at the tip of this bridge, you can do some serious damage. If you look at the map, you should always focus on a handful of those, really just barely regions, like right here at this little tip of the bridge to, shoot the gas at this expansion. There's one that's really big. Or for, dropping purposes, if you can just get a few guys here to shoot at this expansion. Just looking for any little hole where you can get something just barely in range with your tanks is it's really fun in this matchup, to be honest. Because that's a pretty big amount of damage you're going to do. Hiya accidentally sieging within range. And now no longer has those happy Wraiths and has to sacrifice yet more SCVs. But in the grand scheme of things, what we're seeing right here is that Hiya is just basically keeping his unit count compared to MVP's unit count pretty even. They're trading a lot of units, and that's about it. And this allows Hiya to take more expos and just slowly add on more factories. Not going for the jugular by any means, just positioning just far enough forward to kind of lure the opponent out. And look at this, just backing right off. No big deal. Just want to not sacrifice the position that you're in. So the natural question is, we're MVP. How do we get out of this situation? This is a completely adequate choice right now to get a bunch of vultures, because as we've seen, we have 5 factories in MVP's base. MVP can get, oh, look at this is so good, running around the back, mining everything up. That'll continue to delay this push. But most importantly, Hiya and MVP have been trading units. Both of them are kind of low on units, so any harass MVP does with vultures is going to be doubly effective, right? Because there's really not that many units to cover all the bases that Hiya is inevitably taking. This is kind of a sacrifice you're willing to take if you're Hiya. Uh-oh, we see some units having some mine troubles in the middle there. This is like a sacrifice you're willing to take as Hiya, right? To get in this great position, to get this bottom expansion, and we're already taking a 4th base in the top right. You don't mind so much if a few vultures poke around. Ideally, you want to stop them, but you don't mind if a few sort of run around and do a little bit of damage. And this is what's so nice about having these extra factories. You can devote as much gas as you want to the tanks, and then you have a few vultures. And vultures really allow you to push forward very, very aggressively. One of the greatest examples of vulture use in the history of Terran vs. Terran is Cassie against Nada on Longinus. That game was so awesome. It was game 4 of their OSL semifinal best of 5. Incredible, total domination by Cassie. Using vultures in this fashion to be aggressive, not using vultures purely for harassment, but really getting in the opponent's face. And now expanding away, everything seems well and good. What we're really starting to see now is the utility of the vultures on this map. It's so wide and open, planting mines allows you to get in some really nice positions, and suddenly MVP is starting to get some ground back. I do like this choice by Hiya, though, to respond by getting a ton of vultures himself, because then he mines up this progress in his own right. Because if you think about it, if it's 2 base tank vulture against 3, almost 4 base tank vulture with more factories, you know who's going to win. You don't have to worry too much about anything nutty happening. And also our opponent is starting to poach out in the middle of the map with tank vultures, so if we have a bazillion vultures as Hiya, we can also put some pressure on our opponent. I would no doubt assume right now that with all these guys moving around, all these red vultures moving up north, that Hiya's replenishing with tanks and Goliaths. He's not just going to make a bazillion trillion extra vultures in this stage. Well, we do see a few extra vultures there, so alas, I am wrong, but that would be the first time that has ever happened, so just, state that for the record. And we have this expansion coming up. I love that. Look at what Hiya did. He ran his vultures up here. He planted a few mines here. I'm going to actually wait for this observer's mouse to move. See, now you can see a little bit better. There's actually a line of red mines here, obviously protecting this expansion and gearing up to take these 3 bases. So we're doing that action. We're having fun with that. But then we rush right up to the next logical place for our yellow Terran to expand. Another thing that I really like about Hiya is that he could have easily taken this right base as his 3rd base, and then he would have basically had all his bases pointed at an arrow to where he was going to take next. He would have already set up some nice defense along this little route. But again, because when we have an even map split, because this expo is so important, I like his decision of taking that expansion earlier on and defending that appropriately. Well, defending it after the vultures did their damage there. And this is what's so cool about having a bunch of vultures, is that your opponent really can only hit entrenched vultures with bigger numbers of vultures. Because if you try to run up with tank Goliaths, the mines pop up and then you facepalm. And God forbid you facepalm. God forbid you ever look stupid on the internet. Oh man, that's the worst. So continuing to push, and now these mines look, they've been holding them off just long enough for him to set up some tanks here. So I used too many hymns there. Hiya's mines delayed MVP just long enough to set up some tanks of his own. And I do like this. See, look, we have another floating building right there checking that expansion. That is what you want to do anytime you're feeling a little bit behind, is to make sure that your opponent's not taking any sort of weird, nutty expansions. And look at this. Getting Wraiths because of the permanent sight range advantage. Oh, I love Wraiths. And also notice how smoothly that's integrated into Hiya's build, right? He was going for the science facility anyways, so he could get the +2 upgrade, because then your tanks kill your opponent's tanks in 2 shots with the +2 upgrade. But, by doing so, he's letting himself get the Wraiths. He was just getting them along the way. He's not doing something else and saying, oh, hey, I want some Wraiths. He's said going for the upgrade and using the Wraiths because that's already part of his plan. Hip, hip, hooray. We see a little pushing action going on down here. Pretty much looks like MVP was like, oh crap, I can't break that. And then so he's moving down here and expanding at the same time. Attacking and expanding simultaneously. One of the fundamental techniques in all of StarCraft. And probably other strategy games too if I played them. I've actually been playing the original Command and Conquer as of late, and I will just say that engineers are fucking bullshit. I cannot tell you how many times I've just, gone to get a drink and thought, nah, I don't want to pause it because my retarded Tiberium harvesters are going to take forever to get back. And in the meantime, 2 engineers stepped into my base and just, captured my refinery while my harvester was there. And if you guys don't play the original Command and Conquer, just trust that what I'm saying is totally unfair for me and that I'm a victim. Oh god, the troubles I have playing video games all day. And then we do see that +2 upgrade going down. Some nice little tank lines being established. I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable as Hiya, because notice that there's this big break in my tank line. It's not the biggest deal, because really I have tanks here, and this wall's helping me out a bit. But in all honesty, I'm needing this wall. I'm a little bit desperate for it, because my opponent really is pushing pretty strongly here at the southern end. And look at how tightly Hiya's hugging back along this wall. Man, he's holding that really, really tightly there. MVP doing a good job of sort of exploding forward with expansions. You can actually see on the minimap he's still sticking with those 5 factories. Just getting in great positions by using his vultures to very aggressively push forward. So that way he can take key positions really quickly and then mining them up. You'll really never be able to kill someone with just vultures, because honestly, Goliaths and tanks kill them so fast. But you can pierce holes and take key positions of terrain really nicely, especially on a map this big. So it looks like Hiya starting to move forward himself. MVP running back. Again, these vultures are very helpful in busting in here because they can go right on over those mines. And also they take so much damage. They're like ultra-mobile SCVs that can lay mines. And I guess they do damage, but, you know, not really. And this, now, I would just be like, oof, that's sort of a game-winningly good blow for Hiya. Because, right, not only is Hiya already securing this top half right here, but now he's cut off his opponent from this bottom half. So Hiya's getting kind of big leeway with his expanding. And that's a big thing to note, that Hiya is not, he's not trying to like go over here and kill this expansion or go up here and kill this one. Instead, he's just trying to set up a tank line like this. And this is what I was talking about poaching forward with tank lines, right? Ideally, or excuse me, not ideally, but normally, typically, you're going to have this tank line as Hiya, right? Just sort of along this way. So that way you can have your half of the map. And all of a sudden, it's huge to have it be bent like this. Because you're basically saying, I'm not going to win now, but later, when you can't get these two expansions, that's when I'm really going to rape you. That's exactly what he's saying. I heard him say that as he pushed. Fantastic. Love this sort of pushing action. Just getting in good little spots with your tank lines. And then all just needs to do is mine up this backside a little bit. And if he sees more holes in the defenses, he can continue to push forward. But he doesn't need to push forward right now. He will, because he's a pro and he's comfortable taking these sorts of opportunities. But if you're in Hiya's position and you don't know if you have enough vultures, you don't know if you have enough tanks, rest assured that you're going to get an economic advantage by having the bottom left expansion. Or alternatively, simply by not letting your opponent expand there. So MVP, though he did do a valiant effort, taking his expansion, exploding forward and taking his bottom one, we see he just didn't quite have enough units. That early pressure that Hiya was doing is finally really biting him in the ass. But I really loved what Hiya did, where he just set up these lines here, and then he just jutted forward to that southern position. Oh man, Hiya's so cool. And notice how many vultures Red's using. Hiya's just using so many vultures. I love that. I love his vulture use. It's really fun to watch in action. And honestly, just as a slight side note, if any of you are ever looking to improve in a matchup, I do recommend, I always say pick one build and one map and just play that one matchup over and over again. But if you're looking for good starting points, like what I would recommend doing is picking one player and just watch 15 of their games in a row. And when I say 15 in a row, I mean like 15 consecutive games in a row. Hopefully on the same map. If you can't do that, no big deal. What this allows you to see is all the patterns that this player employs. Because what's really funny is that when you sit down and you just watch like one player a lot, you'll start to see that they don't actually use that huge of a variety of builds. Like Bisu, I've seen used so many times in Protoss vs. Zerg. He opens up with Corsairs, and then gets up to 6 Corsairs, and then uses early Zealots and Archons to take an expansion. Not to go attack, but just to take an expansion, and he uses his 6 Corsairs to put pressure on the Zerg. He uses it all the time. And obviously, he does other things as well, but, he uses that quite a bit. And if I ever wanted to learn that, I would use him as an example. So let's just open it up for some questions while I finish up wrapping that point. But yeah, so Hiya, I think, is a totally reasonable person to choose. I really like his Terran vs. Terran quite a bit. He's one of the consistently fun Terrans to watch in that matchup, I believe. So if anyone has any cool questions they want to ask me, go ahead and do it while I ban this guy forever. Unless, of course, he was joking, in which case, no big deal. Well, we wait for those questions to keep on rolling in. I did want to say the original Command & Conquer is so fun. Oh my god. It just has these things that are just like absolute outrageous bullshit. Like the fact that you have one worker, right? And it's kind of interesting to think about. Because StarCraft, you always have like a bazillion, infinity, million workers. But here you have like a worker, and they have the worst AI. It's like, seriously, it's like having one Dragoon collect your money. It is the worst thing possible. And, you know, when it dies, you just get so enraged. I mean, I was, like, playing this mission, and I was doing really well. It's like, oh, man, I'm so awesome. And then, like, this engineer that I couldn't see, because on the mini-map, infantry are, like, less than a pixel dots. They're microscopic. Just captured my refinery when my harvester was there, and I had, like, no money. So I just, like, I rage quit. I rage quit a strategy game from 95 when I was playing single player. So, LOL says, let's see here, what does LOL says? You know, for some reason I'm not getting any questions tonight about Terran vs. Terran, so I'll just take this one briefly. Oh, Makami asked an excellent question, so I'll come to Makami after this one. LOL says, tonight Flash plays against Best. I know you don't delve into statistics, but Best has bested Flash 3 out of 4 games and is really good at PvT. Who do you think will win? I'm actually putting my money on Flash. I think they'll be awesome games. I think it could go either way, but I'm going to put my money on Flash because he's promised to have this new suave style of playing, so I'm really interested to see that. But now let's go back to some Terran vs. Terran questions, just for about 10 minutes or so, because I have somewhere to be at 8 p.m. So Makami says, how do you punish Terran player who goes for really early mass dropship play? That is a stunningly kick-ass question. Let's come back to the main map, so that way I can illustrate some things. So let's say you're Hiya, and our opponent is MVP, and we didn't get to do this big push in here. We're still gearing up to take these 3 expansions and to contain our opponent. Naturally, what will end up happening is that if our opponent tries to get too many dropships too fast... Actually, let me back up. Once we get this good contain up here, then we can just put a worker here. And then we can use another worker to sort of scout around here. And we're starting to say, uh-oh, my opponent really isn't expanding. And he isn't even trying to break out. I guess he's going dropship. These are the sorts of timings that are very important to work on. And really, a lot of times it's as easy as, oh, I haven't seen him do anything yet. It can only really be this one thing. Let me give a brief example of that. Zerg vs. Protoss. I'm Zerg. My Protoss opponent 1 base fast gases. He's either going to move out early with some Zealots and Dragoons with his Corsair, or he's going to early expand with some Templar, or he's going to come out with some early Zealot with leg speeds. But if I'm not seeing any of that, like I haven't seen a Corsair and he hasn't moved out yet, I just go, oh, he's going for fast Reaver, you know, and then that sort of happens. So you can use the same sort of logic in this matchup to be like, oh my god, I'm starting to realize he's doing, goodbye, Corwin. You can use the same sort of logic to, in this matchup, I'm just going to close Skype briefly. Yeah, it's a very sad Skype. You can use the same sort of logic to keep tabs on his expanding. So in that case, you're on your 3 expansions. You shouldn't get overly eager and take this 4th. You should focus on making a few turrets here and turtling just a little bit and then just expand a little bit more slowly. Maybe focus on taking this one instead of this one. Really the most important thing is just that you don't freak out and overextend yourself, because a Terran player who goes for really fast mass dropship can only really get 4 or 5 dropships worth of stuff to do any real damage with. So that means that he's really not going to have that many units ever in one place, but whenever he does get there, he's going to be able to position them really well. So, for instance, if you are on this map, you know, you have these 3 bases put up, you're kind of starving your opponent up here, and he drops this one and you're losing that one, don't freak out and try to counter it. Just expand somewhere else and continue to starve him and make sure that you're continuing to play well defensively. You know that whenever he drops you on your units, you're going to win because you have more. So yeah, I think that's a pretty sweet question. I dig it quite a bit. Let's see. When is it a viable option to go battle cruiser? Here's a fancy question. A lot of times when you are at an economic advantage. Okay, so there's two big situations where it happens. Let me do the first one where you're at an economic disadvantage. So battle cruisers are pretty damn efficient units. They can deal out a lot of damage and then not die, and you can have your flotilla move around the map with a bunch of SCVs, you know, collecting stuff, repairing those battle cruisers, and you know you're in good shape. So if you're in an economic disadvantage, like you just can't get another expansion, so this would be something where it's like 5 gas against an opponent's 6 gas, you can turtle up super hard and just start going battle cruisers as a like defensive play to sort of go, oh man, I need to get these battle cruisers to, you know, start staying alive to get some sort of edge. And a lot of times when you do that, when it's like his 6 expansions with gas versus your 5 expansions with gas, there's like one expansion that neither of you can take, and you're focusing on using your battle cruisers and your tanks to sort of shift forward and take that out. And notice that in all these examples I'm saying this, you have like 4 bases or something before you even consider getting battle cruisers. The other one is when you are at an economic advantage. And then likewise, you can sort of sit back and turtle and get some battle cruisers. And there's really not that much that your opponent can do about it. There was a game, just for some examples of what I'm talking about, there was a game where it was light against, I want to say Really or Up Magic. Who was it? It was Leda, I think it was. There we go. So it was Leda against Light. And Light was Terran. He had the whole bottom half of the map. And Leda had been super duper aggressive and was sort of like putting the finishing blows on him. And got like 30 starports and started going for mass Wraith, which is great because it really allows you to control the map very well. No drops are going to do any damage to you. You can push locations super quickly by, harassing with Wraiths here, bouncing back, and then going for the push and busting, penetrating little holes here and there. And Light responded by turtling up super hard, sieging up all his tanks, getting a bazillion turrets, and getting battle cruisers. There's another good situation for that. But, punishing your opponent economically. A great example of the punishing economically is Up Magic against Flash on Sin Chu Peng Ryung. Up Magic was at the bottom position, and so on Sin Chu Peng Ryung, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's kind of like Destination in that there's these 2 expansions that are at the side that it's not really clear who's supposed to take them. So it's the same way on Sin Chu Peng Ryung, there's these 2 side expansions. Well, Up Magic, got far enough forward with his tanks that he had secured those 2 side expansions. So it was like Flash having, let's see, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4 bases on the top. And then Up Magic had 6 bases on the bottom, had a line of tanks and turrets across a thin map, and just instantly went battle cruisers. And he screwed up with his battle cruisers and almost lost. And, don't do that. But it's a great example of when to get battle cruisers to economically punish your opponent. Where you say, hey, I don't actually need to get forward. I don't need to get in any new positions. I just don't need to at all. So I'm just going to get a bunch of battle cruisers and force you to come to me at some point so I can batter you. If you're pretty even in the matchup, I think one thing that I would consider, though, is that when I say even, how do I want to say this? Don't consider going battle cruisers if you're on like 2 bases or 3 bases, because they are expensive and they are hard to get, and you need to have enough stuff to set up a strong line that can hold the front. If you try to get them a little too early, then your opponent's just going to take a billion expansions, and then it doesn't even matter what he does, he's just going to rape you, So if you're at an economic disadvantage, make sure it's 5 base versus 6 base or something like that. If you're at an economic advantage, make sure it's like 6 base versus 4 base or 5 base or something like that. It gets a little gray in those in between areas, and that's really where it just takes a good player, and it's very situational. And hopefully I'll illustrate that, when I watch some more Terran vs. Terrans and point them out. But I think I've been rambling about that enough. So Not Jack says, previously you said it's a good idea to skip an expansion while going along the side of the map, starting at the bottom right and skipping 3 for top right, so you can defend the 3 easier. While you said the opposite in this match with Hiya, is this because of the 5 o'clock expansion involvement? Let me read that one more time. Previously said it's a good idea to skip an expansion while going along the side of the map. I'm a little confused on what you mean. I think what Not Jack is asking about is that I was saying, I was talking about how Hiya took this expansion up here instead of this one. Let's see here. I'm really curious because the problem is that Not Jack had to split his question over 2. He had to split it over 2 like posts because he ran out of characters, so it got broken in half. Previously said it's a good idea to skip an expansion while going along the side of the map, starting at the bottom right and skipping the 3 for the top right, so you can defend the 3 easier. While you said the opposite in this match with Hiya, is this because of the 6 o'clock expansion's involvement? I still don't quite get it. I'm going to unmute the chat, and hopefully you can clarify for that, and I will re-ask. And again, that's a direct result of the fact that, it had to be broken in half. So Blah says, it seems like none of the pros go nukes in Terran versus Terran, even in very long games, like Flash versus Firebat Hero. How come they never seem to be going nukes? Are battlecruisers just that much better? I really like nukes a lot. There was a great game where a player who I'm not going to be able to remember, I think it was Leda versus Flash on Neo Medusa. Flash was at the top, Leda was at the bottom. Oh, by the way, not Jack, please ask your question again so I can not butcher the reading of it this time. But yeah, so Flash was at the top, Leda was at the bottom, and he was trying to push in, but Flash was in this really nice position. And whenever you get these big tank lines set up and it's hard to find a good place to penetrate in there, that's when nukes are very useful, because you can plant the nuke down pretty far in front of the tank line. Especially it's useful if you have a barracks floating forward and you nuke underneath the barracks and they can't even see it. And then, with one big explosion, bam, all the tanks are gone. And even if they don't die, you still get to walk forward into the region where the nukes were. So that, I think, is great. The best example of absolutely needing to get nukes and having it be an egregious error, the fact that you did not get nukes, is Firebat Hero versus Flash on Neo Medusa, their epic game where Flash is at the right, Firebat Hero is at the left, and takes the entire whole map except for the natural, like the 12 o'clock natural, and Flash has a whole bunch of tanks just sieged up there, positioned, and one nuke would have just raped that in half. But, so yeah. Anyways, so I haven't seen Not Jack re-ask his question, so hopefully he didn't just depart, because I would like to rehear that question. Go ahead and hold off on the questions, everyone else, because I have chosen the questions I would like to do. So, DJ ZAPZ says, when pushing against a wall of tanks and Vultures, Goliaths, and Terran vs. Zerg, how do you go about microing your army? With what kind of timing do you send your units in? Also, how do you set them up before the push, and what kind of controls do you want to use to siege, and where do you siege? Really, the most important thing is to make sure your vultures are in the front. Still not Jack has asked the question, so I'll just say too late. So I would say just as long as the vultures are in front to take all the damage, and then move your tanks forward, and don't move the tanks that far forward. You really just want to have your tanks in range of his tanks. So honestly, if you just run your vultures forward and inch your tanks forward like 4 hexes and then siege up, great spot to be in. It really also depends on where you're trying to break into. So for instance, let's say the MVP had a tank line like this. Let's say it was a straight line and it went right through the middle. And Hiya has a line that goes like this. It's just to the right of the middle. When you use your tanks and vultures, it might be useful to move your vultures up here and then siege your tanks in a line like this is Hiya. Because then you've sort of scooped like this to claim these expansions. And then, yeah, even though MVP has a longer line of tanks, they're defending not as useful of a region. Namely, they're not defending this main. So yeah, that's how I would go about that. So Do the Evolution says, I disagree with your dropship opinion in this match. In this match, would not dropships for MVP be a logical way to follow? Would he gain mobility and be able to put more pressure on Hiya's expansions but sacrifice middle control? But MVP's expansion were viable for that middle game and were easy to defend against the land push. What I would say in regards to that is, you can use dropships, but I'm really just saying be careful. I personally don't like it that much because you just don't really have that many units. Dropships are pretty expensive. If you get like a dropship or 2 dropships and do some nice little harassment things that are very calm, but I dislike the idea of turtling up on 2 bases and going for just a whole bunch of dropships and trying to do some damage with that, because any good player will really crush you pretty hard. So, again, with really everything I say, you should take it with a grain of salt. I'm not saying absolutely never do this ever, that's the worst thing ever, unless, of course, I say that. Because really, you can get away with doing anything as long as you pull it off properly. So, just to be clear, the concerns I have with dropship play on 2 bases are that you won't have enough units to do damage anywhere, and your 3rd expansion is getting continuously delayed. So I will just take one more question from Seraphim. So he said, you mentioned that the Wraiths bought MVP 30 seconds. Couldn't he, if he had gained those 30 seconds, just by skipping out those Wraiths completely? I guess I didn't word that properly. What I meant was that ordinarily, the Wraiths will buy you a little bit of time, like 30 seconds, to delay your opponent's push. In that time, you can use that to get tanks with siege, and then that sort of secures your expansion and you're feeling comfortable. Unfortunately, Hiya found a timing window where he went in there and killed him anyways, you know. So, obviously, I think what Seraphim's trying to say is that, you know, wouldn't it have been more useful to get siege or something like that, you know, so he could have defended. I think that MVP was just so confident with his play and was so certain, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm just going to get some Wraiths, I'm going to run in there, I'm going to delay him, and then when I get siege tanks, I'll be fine. I think that push timing really caught him off guard. But assuming that push never happened, what I said is what happens. You know, you use the Wraiths, it forces 2 Goliaths to come out kind of early, and a lot of Terrans don't really want to get 2 Goliaths, or sometimes 4 Goliaths if they're, you know, they're really aggressive Wraith harass. You don't really want to be getting that many Goliaths that early because you sacrifice a little bit of ground. But yeah, that's really all I have to say about that. So that will wrap up Day 9 Daily number 43. Again, tune in tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to see the analysis of Match Point. Match Point's a really fun map. It's one of my absolute favorite maps in a long time, really. I just think it's really fun to watch matches on that map. And so yeah, it is 7:57, so hopefully I will make my 8 p.m. appointment. And that is going to be about that. All right, well, thanks so much, everybody, and cheers.